Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for joining our session. My name is Ahmad Fatahi. I'm a director of data science.
I'm Swetha Kotha. I'm a lead data scientist.
And today we are talking about what's trending in natural language processing as a whole and what we at Spotfire have been doing with large language models. This is our usual boilerplate disclaimer. Any specific comments or timelines or feature promises about our products, will come from our product teams. And so today we are going to cover a few topics in general and fairly quickly. I am going to talk a little bit about the history of large language models and our traditional approach and packages out there about natural language processing with Spotfire. Swetha will then show a very exciting demo of what we have been building so far with large language models dubbed Spotfire Copilot. And then I'll take over again and talk a little bit about the architecture of what Swetha shows, and then we'll close. So let's see, this whole topic of natural language processing, how it started, it goes back several decades when very simplistic statistical models started to look at, how words happen together or don't happen together. The more of a simple frequency models, n-grams as they called them, which was, useful in the beginning, but, there's only so much you can do with those simplistic models. And then toward the end of the century, last century, we had this advent of, curious neural networks when people started to get really hyped up about them. But then the problem was there was not much horsepower, like hardware was not even close to the level that we are enjoying today. So again, there were some limitations. What happened, probably starting to get really serious about giving rise to what we today enjoy about natural language processing use cases is in the early 2000s, there was this notion of modeling words as vectors in a like a high dimensional space where you can think of it conceptually as the space of concepts and thoughts being modeled as this huge multidimensional space. I'm talking about thousands or tens of thousands of dimensions. And that actually gave way to a lot of optimizations. And, once you have these words as vectors in this high dimensional space, now you can work on words and on sentences and things like that with all of the familiar mathematical tools that you had before. So that was a real breakthrough, also giving rise to the use cases like good, more efficient translations from one language to another. In the next decade, we start to see the rise of taking account of sequencing in a more structured way that was also compliant with the neural network. So specific types of neural network architectures like RNNs and LSTM came to the scene that enabled a more natural interpretation of language as opposed to a more mechanical approach to, if then else, rule-based approach. And then most famously, the transformers and the large language models of today, like GPT and BERT and Llama and all of these, super massive models with tens of billions of neurons came to the scene, which is a culmination of all of these technological advances as well as the hardware advances. And we are going to see some examples of all of these. And to give you a quick overview of what Spotfire has been doing before getting into the large language models, in a more traditional way, we have been building and publishing some of the more basic or more traditional natural language processing functions as Python functions or DXPs or data functions. And by the way, these are all downloadable from our exchange. So starting from the simple pre-processing or basic, I should say, pre-processing, some of them are really not that simple, but which are requirements for pretty much anything else, like removing stop words or stemming and things of that nature, as well as n-grams and looking at your basic statistics or exploration of your corpus. And then moving on to the next layer of applications, more traditional, like you want to see the sentiment, if a certain sentence is more positive or not. Is it more factual, objective, or is it more of a expression of feelings and sentimental or subjective, as opposed to if you want to take out or identify specific named entities that you're interested in, like location names or product names and things of that nature. There's a simple example on the right hand side of the screen you can see, and I encourage you to take a look at some of these published pieces or assets from our community exchange, and there are some links toward the end of this presentation that I encourage you to take a look at. The next step that we are going to spend pretty much the rest of this presentation on is what we have been building with large language models to build a Spotfire Copilot, while having the human being, the end user, you as the captain or the pilot. This, we believe, is going to be the next layer of sophistication in having a smart copilot based on large language models to be your guide and make you more efficient. And without further ado, I pass it over to my colleague Sueda, who's going to show us a quick demo.
Thanks, Ahmad. So I'm just going to give a little introduction of what we're about to see. So Spotfire Copilot has been in progression, especially with the advent of LLMs across the last year or so. So the way that we started this out is that we wanted to create a Spotfire knowledgeable question answering system. And that's what you're going to see first, how we essentially enable these large language models to learn more about Spotfire, given Spotfire product documentation, as well as other multimedia. But from there, we wanted to actually take it even a step further. So these models are still limited in some of their multimodal capabilities. And what I mean by that is Spotfire users are, of course, interested in generating dashboards and visuals. So how can we essentially use these large language models for auto chart generation, as well as like even automatically creating a dashboard? So I'm going to go ahead and show what we have here. So right now we're within Spotfire. You can see this main page for Spotfire Copilot. And I'm going to go ahead and bring you to this Spotfire question answering page. So you'll see here, I'm asking the model a question. Tell me about Spotfire's history. And it's actually reaching out to what you can consider regular GPT in order to answer that Spotfire was founded in 1996, et cetera, et cetera. So this is something that GPT itself is trained on or has a vast knowledge of. But now I want to go ahead and ask a more specific question. How do I install Python libraries in Spotfire? I'm going to go ahead and send that to the model. And with this, it's actually relying on knowledge from product documentation as well as other multimedia that we uploaded. So it's giving me step-by-step instructions on how I can install Python libraries in Spotfire. But if you notice at the bottom, it's also providing citation information from how it got this information. So we did this to actually reduce hallucinations in the models, as that's been very popular right now as models are drifting. Now I'm asking another question. How do I connect to streaming data in Spotfire? I'm also adjusting some of the parameters. So on this bottom left panel, you can see which model I'm reaching out to, as well as the temperature, which affects the non-deterministic nature of the answer. So I'm setting that low. And here you get a very generic response, but I added a few more words, tell me step by step, and reran it. And you can see now I get step-by-step instructions on how I can connect to streaming data in Spotfire. So this is how even the slight change of words can really have a nuanced effect in your end result. This is why prompt engineering nowadays is so important. Now I'll briefly go over some of the other use cases that we're working on. One of them is data interrogation. So given a data set, and we send this data set or subsets of this data to the large language models, how can I ask questions about relationships between the variables? And how can I ask the model how I might visualize these relationships? So you'll notice that the answer is still text out at the bottom. The model is able to give me statistics as well as other information on what the metadata in these columns might mean. And here's also a use case on code generation. So in Spotfire, we're concerned with Iron Python and custom expression code generation. And these are some of the other use cases that we've been playing with. These models are already well-versed in Python, are popular coding languages, but we're really interested in the more Spotfire specific code. So here, generating Iron Python code to visualize different variables. and it's provided down below. But now we're going to move into the more the multimodal side when we're concerned with auto chart generation. So here we have Spotfire Copilot, our newest version on the bottom right. It's almost like a conversational chatbot. So I'm actually asking some of the questions that I had before. So tell me about Spotfire's history. And the same question that I had before that came out in a text area in Spotfire is now coming out in the Spotfire Copilot interface. So you'll see that the model was loading the request and now it's actually processing it. It takes some time because Ahmad will talk about this later, but we're actually going back and forth between the model to devise this prompt. It's very intricate in the sense that, like I said, how you send a prompt can very well influence the end result. So here we have actually a much larger paragraph that's explaining how Spotfire was conceived. Now I'm asking one of the questions from before, how do I connect to streaming data in Spotfire? Again, tell me step by step. And you can think about this as a chatbot or a help agent in Spotfire. That's what we're really aiming towards. And this is similar to what we saw before. And if you hover over again, you can see the exact citations for how this answer was devised. Let's kind of jump into the more interesting aspect and how we're trying to create these visuals within Spotfire. So essentially, these large language models are limited to text in and text out, and we need to be creative in a way to kind of move past this. So here we're working with a superstores data set that contains information on products as well as other demographics information. And now we're going to go to a similar page that looks like how we configured the GPT models prior to before. And you see, again, we have different parameters for which model we're trying to hit. Here I'm hitting GPT-4, and I'm going to go ahead and ask a question on that data set. What's my best-selling product category? And this is actually, when you think about it, this is almost like a vague overarching question, but of course it's very important to an analyst in any industry. So, the terms like what could best apply, and also like what does product category necessarily match to in the data set? So these the models itself here is returning an intermediate. So given this data set, what we're doing is creating an intermediate data view. So essentially, we can't send our data to these models. There's a lot of security reasons as well as hitting token limits that we're concerned with. So when we created this intermediate data view, what we're interested in is getting the important information from the data set. So creating almost like an intermediate aggregate data table. Now, when I send this question again with this aggregated information, you see that I get a response. Your best-selling product category is technology with total sales over 5 million. But what's important here is that I can actually hit a button to create a visualization that's showing me exactly that. So you'll see that there's sum of sales total on the y-axis, and then product category 1 on the x-axis. So given this question, what's my best selling product category, the model was able to discern which axes and which chart type to actually create to show the final answer. Now I'm asking another question. Show me sales over time by product category. In addition to being able to create that visualization with the click of a button, you'll see that there's also instructions on how someone can do it manually in Spotfire step by step. But of course, I'm just going to go ahead on the root and click that create visualization button. And we'll see it pop up on the left side over here as I move this chatbot. So here we have sum of sales total on the y-axis, and then we have date binned on the x-axis, and it's colored by product category. So there's quite a few things going on here, right? The model has to discern which columns to match to in the data set. It has to discern what to do with these different types of variables. So there's a lot going on beyond these this kind of surface level interactions you see. So I'm going to ask this last question, visualize sales, product category, or order priority. And again, we'll see a chart pop up on the bottom, in this case, a bar chart again. So just given these 3 sample questions I might have about the data set, I was able to put them in to Spotfire Copilot and automatically create a dashboard page. And here what I want to show when I click on the bottom right visual is that these are full Spotfire visuals. So I'm just going to change the markings for this one visual. And what I want to do is I can also go to Spotfire Copilot and say mark product technology. So for those of you who are familiar with Spotfire, visuals are highly interactive with markings, filters, and other capabilities. And we can actually change that within Copilot itself. So when I say mark product technology, you'll see that a subset of the data is going to be marked, and this influences all the visuals concurrently. So hitting mark rows here, and you'll see how this affects the limited data on the bottom right, as well as the other two visuals. I can also just select any subset of the data too. So this is a quick overview of Spotfire Copilot. We're really excited to see how this development can lead to advanced analytics, auto chart generation, and even automatic dashboard creation in the future. And now I'll pass it back to Ahmad.
All right, thank you, Sridhar. That was great. So I hope you are not only more intimately familiar with the user experience that we are trying to create here through Copilot, but also curious how these all of these different scenarios happen. So what I'm going to spend the next 5 minutes or so on is to take you on a journey and basically take you under the hood on the Copilot and see how things that we just saw actually happen. Everything we saw, if you follow my marking here, was happening in Spotfire. That's where the end user eventually experiences everything. Once the prompt or the user's input in text is passed on when the user clicks, the orchestrator is the heart and the brain of this whole operation. And a bunch of things happen here. I'm going to touch on it. I have another slide to take you deep into the orchestrator. So for now, just assume that a bunch of logic happens here, and basically the end user's prompt gets intercepted by the orchestrator. It infers, first of all, the mode or the intent of the user, and we just saw a bunch of them exemplified, like chart generation, data interrogation, asking about Spotfire help or asking about Spotfire history. Each one is a very different mode of operation. Based on that inferred mode, then the orchestrator queries a bunch of resources that are made available in the batch mode or offline manner to the orchestrator or to the Copilot. And you can imagine that, if let's say you are coming from a energy domain, or your company is in the field of healthcare or HR, whatever it may be, not only you have use cases to enable your end users about Spotfire, so you would plug in basically or enable the Copilot to be well versed about Spotfire itself, how it operates, basically be a help function for Spotfire. But also you want to enable your users about energy or about HR or healthcare or whatever it may be. The way we have architected this, the Copilot, is that we enable you, your system admin persona, to come in and plug in any document or corpus of text that is of your interest in a secure and private manner. It will become your Copilot for your organization. It will not be shared with anybody else, but at the same time, it will be at the disposal of the instance of your Spotfire Copilot. In real time, then when the query comes in, a search engine, we have Azure here, in a bunch of places. It's because we are partners with Azure. It's pretty agnostic, but our implementation so far is with Azure. So Azure Cognitive Search or any vector database then taps into these resources and picks the top 5 or top 10 search results related to the end user's query. When the results come back to the orchestrator, it has the context, let's say the 5 paragraphs related to the question at hand. On top of that, the orchestrator sets up the proper parameters, such as the type of question requires more creativity or less creativity. Generating code requires creativity, for example, so it would set the parameter to high for the language model to be creative, more creative, and less or pretty low if the question at hand is only about how do I do X in Spotfire. It has to be pretty much hard rooted in the documentation. When all those settings and the context are put together, only at that point the orchestrator sends the combination to the foundation model. In this case, we are using Azure OpenAI, but again, it can be any large language model. The results come back, and the orchestrator parses that and sends back eventually whatever the outcome may be to Spotfire, and the end users sees their experiences the outcome only at that point. So in all of the demos that we saw in Sueda's demo, when she hits send or sends the query to the ether, the end user doesn't see what's happening, but all of these steps happen under the hood. The next step that I'm going to take you with us here is a zoom in or a blowout version of that orchestrator box. It's in and of itself a very sophisticated application. So this view is less of the flow and more about what's happening in that orchestrator. If I take my marker back, this big box in the middle is the orchestrator. When the prompt comes in, first of all, the intent is inferred. Is it, like I said, is it about data? Is it about chart generation? Is it about asking for help about this Spotfire feature or whatever it may be? Interestingly enough, in many of these cases, we actually use the large language model itself. So in under one query, we might go back and forth to the large language model more than once. So we can say, hey, GPT-4, this is the prompt. How would you classify it if we have these 5 options? Chart generation, data interrogation, Spotfire help, and so forth. That would make one round trip. And then when we get the intent back, we use that intent to basically go off to one of these branches, depending on the inferred intent. And also we use that to optimize the parameters. Like I said, the creativity or which model even to use. And there are a few other parameters that we fix under the hood based on that intent. And once the prompt is concocted together, engineered, hence the phrase prompt engineering, together with all of these optimized parameters that not only optimizes for the best user experience possible, but also for latency, for cost, because every query costs money. That's how these models work. Only then this combination is sent to the LLM. So as you can imagine, this whole combination is pretty large and is a sophisticated application in and of itself. The large language model, which is either black box or semi-black box these days, is outside, and we leverage that in the way I described. And these are all the possible corpuses of text that I mentioned before that orchestrator can tap into when it gets specific questions to use as the context. I encourage you, first of all, if you're more curious, to check out all these resources. In our community, we have a few pretty extensive write-ups, both on the whole concept of natural language, as well as the Spotfire Copilot. And evolving, we keep updating them, refreshing them. And also, I encourage you to, if this is of interest to your organization, there are some instructions how to reach out to us if you're curious to learn more. So that's the action about Copilot. The packages for traditional natural language functions, they're downloadable already through our exchange. And there are a bunch of other resources in general about applications of Spotfire in various industries, which very well may be close to your field of operation. And I encourage you to also check out a few other sessions at this conference and take advantage of the whole host of sessions to enable you all different personas in your organization. And last but not least, our Spotfire demo gallery, which is the collection of all these applications, not only just views, but also the clickable demos that you can start in your cloud environment, in your browser, in our cloud environment, and play around with Spotfire. With that, I'd like to thank you for your time attending our session, and wish you a great rest of the conference.